It's 2:02. I'm calling to order this special meeting of the City Council of the City of Bandera on Thursday, May the 7th at 10 a.m. All council members are present. City administrator is present. City secretary is present. Our marshal is here today, and Keely is our technical expert. Item 2 is visitors to be heard. That has been suspended during this emergency by the governor's order. Item 3 is the consent agenda. Approval of minutes for the emergency meeting on March 20th, 2020, special meeting on April 6th, 2020, special meeting on April 16th, 2020 at 10:30 a.m., special meeting on April 16th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m., and special meeting on April 28th, 2020.
Motion to approve.
Consent agenda approved. Jerry, second. All in favor? All in favor, unopposed. Thank you, Council. Item 4 is the regular agenda. Item A, discussion of possible action to cancel the regular meeting of May 7th, 2020 at 6 p.m.
Motion to approve.
Rebecca makes a motion to approve. Any discussion on that? All in favor? All in favor, none opposed. Item B, discussion of possible action to approve a resolution creating a local government code chapter 380 economic development program for COVID-19 disaster relief to be administered by the Bandera Economic Development Corporation.
Ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am. Dan is on also if anybody has.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Our attorney Dan Santee is available by Zoom. Council, the resolution is before you. The only question in your exhibit A, item 4, the parameters of the administration of the program, and I think we agreed that it would be the same as the EDC program. So you have to pass a resolution, if I'm not mistaken, Dan, to participate, right?
In the 380.
Mayor, could you repeat that? I had a hard time hearing you.
Suzanne, Dan asked you to repeat the question.
Okay. My question is the EDC has to pass a resolution in order to participate in this, right?
Well, so yes, if the EDC is in agreement with administering this program, yes, they do have to accept that responsibility.
Okay. With the resolution. With the resolution.
And the intent here is basically to provide the same amount of funding that the EDC is committed, and for them to administer it under the same parameters that you established for them at the last meeting. And what we would have to, the one piece we don't have yet created would be the performance agreement that would be executed by those receiving the assistance, because it would have to include the elements required for an agreement under Chapter 380, in addition to the typical requirements for under 505 and 501 for an EDC.
So in that case, then, as far as performance stipulations and reporting, then the recipient will enter into a performance agreement with the City of Bandera and the EDC to use the money as it's designated.
Yes, that would be the intent, so that both if this resolution is approved, it would be authorizing you as mayor to execute those agreements as they're negotiated by the BEDC. You would be doing that on behalf of the city, and they would not have, those individual agreements would not be required to come back before this council unless that is something that you decide to require.
Rebecca?
I'm not seeing a performance agreement here, though. What does the performance agreement
Right. Yeah, well, you're not going to because we haven't drafted the performance agreement yet. That was so yeah, and so until you've approved this program, no, I did not draft a performance agreement because until this is created, I didn't assume that you would want that time and money expended to create the agreement.
Yes.
This is the program. You're creating the program. You're committing to the funding. You're still going to have to amend your budget by ordinance to set those funds aside to fund this program. This is just the resolution saying that, yes, you want to move this forward, and these are the parameters under which it would be administered.
Lynn?
So the city attorney will be developing the performance agreement then?
That's what I understand.
Okay, too.
Anything further, council?
Yes.
Yes, Rebecca.
So if we're saying that this program is going to be administered in the same way that the EDC program is administered, then that means it will follow the resolution that we passed at our last meeting.
Yes, 2003. We printed off the Exhibit A of 2003, so it's very clear on, and that will be filled in under item 4 when we complete the resolution with council's approval. Do we have a motion or question?
I will, go ahead, Lynn.
I don't know if we can't discuss the amount right now, can we? We need to make a motion for
Well,
that.
the resolution says 100,000.
Right. So do we need to make a motion to, because I'd like to discuss that amount.
Okay, the amount actually says not to exceed 100,000. So at this point, we're deciding to create this program for disaster relief up to 100,000. When we get to the performance agreement, then at what point can we change the actual amount that council puts into the program?
So, well, again, my understanding was that if this is going to follow the parameters you already approved for the BEDC, then those same individual guidelines are going to be placed in Exhibit A under 4. If you want to do different ones, then you need to discuss those today and put those parameters in place as opposed to the ones that are in place for BEDC funds. At the last meeting, it was my understanding that when this program came back, the intent was to match the funds, the total funding, and also to match the individual amounts that you previously approved. So that's what would go into Exhibit A, though. And if I'm understanding Lynn's comments correctly, those items, if they're going to be the same as the BEDC guidelines, go under number 4, as the mayor stated, in your exhibit.
So my question is, and I don't know if we can discuss this without a motion, is that I don't remember us saying we're going to match the funds. That was never voted on. So I would like to discuss the amount of funds that we're going to be contributing to this program.
Then why don't we get a motion and a second and go on into beyond explanation into discussion of the program?
Because
Rebecca?
Well, if Lynn still has the floor, I'd like to let her finish her thought.
Because I'm in agreement with us following through with what the UDC already has set up in the resolution as we passed it, that the program stayed the same that way. What I wanted to discuss was the amount of funds.
Okay. Rebecca?
Like the mayor said, we still have to come back to council with a budget adjustment, and Dan said that as well. So I'm not sure if you're talking about exceeding the $100,000, but if it says not to exceed, that means that the budget adjustment could still reflect a smaller amount if that's your goal.
That would be my goal.
So I don't,
That's what I'm trying
may
to
I make
figure out.
a motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Do we have a resolution number for this?
004
2020.
or 04? 2020 04?
2020 004.
2020 004.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution number 2020-004, adding the resolution 2020-003, Exhibit A, under item 4 in Exhibit A, pending budget adjustment and performance agreement.
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay, so the motion was to move forward with this agreement. And what I would want to make clear is that while we have the stipulations for the funding through the Bandera EDC, that would be the first use, and this would only come as a follow-up should the need be in excess of that $100,000 that's been budgeted by the EDC. Okay, yeah, that's kind of one of the main points, that this would be just like a supporting pool of funding should the Bandera EDC program not be able to impact enough businesses that are in need and then qualify for the program. It's like a backup fund.
Rebecca, if I could, I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem Gibson, if I could interject, we need to add that then in Exhibit A,
Okay.
where we have the program parameters. Let's bump the current number 4 to number 5, and then add a new number 4 that specifies that if that's what the pleasure of the majority of the council is, that this is to be used after the initial allotment of BEDC funds are used.
So here's my thought. We have a surplus now. You know, we've got that surplus in our budget right now. But right now, we also only have assumptions of where we're going to be in the next 3 or 4 months. There's only assumptions about how this will add to the reduction of our revenue and how it's going to impact us for the months to come. And you know, it's definitely going to be a reduction in revenue from our sales tax, our hotel tax, and other revenue streams. I want to help the businesses, but the cities need to be prepared to build out the budget over the remaining months. I mean, we need to be able to, you know, use what we have and build out our budget for the remaining months of the 2020 fiscal year. I think, you know, the city is getting ready to embark on some major infrastructure that has been a real need for Bandera for the last 20 years. And I want to make sure that we have those funds in place to get those infrastructure projects done. Now, I will say that Rebecca's idea and the mayor and the city attorney saying that it only be used for a backup, then I could see going along with that. At first, I was thinking maybe only 50,000 instead of the 100,000, instead of matching it with 100,000. But that was just a thought, because I think the city should be saving money, but I also do think that we should help our businesses as well. That's just my thoughts.
Sure.
I think that we need to kind of step back. First of all, EDC has not distributed the funds from the first round, and they should have money left for a second stimulus program, according to what we're seeing so far. As far as not knowing where we're at, we don't have really any idea where we're at as far as lost revenue. We've lost a great deal. The only thing I have as far as information concerning that is this is statewide numbers, but in and this comes from the comptroller, the hot tax for April is down 63% from 2019. Once again, not knowing where we're at financially, I can't see the justification yet to jump into this. I would much rather see it postponed. We won't even have numbers for April until June and May until July at the earliest. Does that sound correct?
That's good.
Okay. And like I say, we have no idea where the revenue's at right now. And does anyone know of any towns similar inside to Bandera where they're doing this type of thing? Can anybody state that?
I would ask Dan, he might know better than.
I mean, I haven't, I've done some research on different websites, and there are cities that are funding to the EDCs. There's a lot of them that are. Of course, they're bigger. They're bigger.
That's
They're not at our size.
That's what I'm referring to. I've done some checking around. Not that many towns, at least close, but Bedford, and they're quite a bit larger than us, but they're not doing anything as far as direct funding. What they're doing is providing information and education as far as the existing federal programs that are already in place, which I wish we would have done a better job compared to some of these cities that have undertaken that. But that's how I feel about it right at this point.
Mayor, I agree with what they're saying about this. I also think that we can always come back to the council and do this if it's needed. It doesn't have to be, it's not an emergency for us.
Yeah, just to reiterate, they haven't even started handing out funds from the first 100,000 yet. So how can we predict how much money they might need, if any?
I get where you're going. My initial thought was that we as a city, as a governing body, need to help support these businesses because, you know, $2,500 is not going to see some of these people through this. But as council has pointed out, we might want to address this again down the road after we see where we really are. So you'll want to vote on this and we can move on?
I'd be happy to withdraw my motion.
I'd like to,
All right, but
well, yeah, I guess you have to withdraw before the election.
may I just, I guess I'll just comment, when we voted at our last meeting on the creation of this, it was my understanding that there was more of a council consensus, but I do agree with and appreciate the discussion. The city, as we all know, we have other financial responsibilities and obligations that the EDC does not. And the consideration to allowing them to roll out their program and then kind of reassess at that point and then come back to this in the future should we feel that it's necessary to help the business community. We can always do that.
So you are withdrawing your
I will
motion?
withdraw my motion.
Dan, your second?
I'll withdraw my second as well.
Okay. Jerry,
I would like to make a motion to postpone this resolution 2020-004 until our June meeting, second June meeting, which I apologize, I don't have the date for that.
speaking up that far.
My second is,
John seconds. Discussion? All in favor? All in favor, none opposed. Thank you, council.
Thank you, Dan.
I think we got some clarification today. All right. Thank you, Dan. Item C is consideration of water treatment plant feasibility report from LMD Engineering and discussion and possible action to authorize the city administrator to execute a contract not to exceed $40,000 for the feasibility study.
We have Derek on the phone from LMD, on the Zoom, so He's available.
Yeah. First off, can y'all hear me well? Do I have a good enough connection here where y'all can hear me well?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Hi, Derek.
Okay. Well, I'm going to introduce Temple Williamson. He's one of our senior project managers with the wastewater treatment and wastewater experience, and he's going to be leading this effort up. He helped in preparing the scope. I'll let him kind of explain and answer any questions y'all may have, kind of give a brief overview, high level, and then answer any questions. Temple?
Yes, good morning. Temple Williamson here with L&V. The background for this project is at the most recent TCEQ inspection, the plant was cited for being in the floodplain. The entire plant is within the FEMA floodway. This feasibility study is to address that citation by the TCEQ. First, we'll identify and evaluate alternatives. We'll review the floodplain impacts and possible mitigation alternatives, review potential sites to relocate the treatment facility, coordinate with the TCEQ regarding if we relocate as far as discharge parameters and limits, and then identify options for conveying the wastewater to the proposed location. Along with that, we'll prepare cost estimates and schedules for the alternatives. Any questions?
Also outlined in the exhibit that's in your package, you know, right here is what he just went through, so you can look at that in your packet as well.
Yes, go ahead. Rebecca.
This is for Jay and maybe for our partners with L&V as well. Are we seeking funding, or are we thinking or projecting that we are going to be able to wrap this cost into a future grant proposal?
That hasn't really been discussed yet. That's maybe one of it. We can get this, I mean, we do have the funds to pay for this if we wanted to today through a budget adjustment. We don't have a line item set aside for it. We can also look at rolling it into any kind of project funding going forward.
And if we remember, council, we do have 100,000 in our future wastewater treatment plant in the utility, so this 40 could come out of that, and we could continue to build on that, so.
So I'd like to make a motion if everybody's finished. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the I'm so sorry. That we approve the authorization to the city administrator to execute a contract not, excuse me, not to exceed 40,000 to complete the feasibility study.
Thank you. Rebecca, second. Discussion. All in favor?
I thought Doug said he had a question. I'm sorry. Did you?
Oh,
Oh, I apologize.
we ready to go?
Aye.
All in favor? All in favor, none opposed. Moving right along.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, thanks.
Receive and discuss an item D. Receive and discuss an update on the L&V street condition survey, and here it is.
Yes, morning, Mayor and Council. Just a quick update. I mean, there's not a whole lot, but we have completed all of the field work portion of our street study, where we've evaluated condition and scored them. We've also kind of prioritized and developed some treatment options to put in our report. Basically, what we're looking at, just like we had in our scope when we presented it to y'all, when y'all authorized it, you know, we're looking at maintenance like seal coats, which is a chip seal, another terminology. We're looking at some of these higher traffic areas, hot mix, ACP, hot mix paving, where you put down a thick mat. And then also the condition of some of the streets within the city. You know, we're looking at providing pricing options for what I'm calling a pavement rehab option, where we basically redo those streets to get them to section and get them paved. You know, there's some of them that are kind of raveling apart and coming apart pretty bad. Not a whole lot of them. I don't have the exact percentage of what those are now, but it'd be low comparatively. We're also, as we're doing this, we captured, when we did the field work, we captured any maintenance stuff that needs to be done to it. You know, some of these streets require base repair and things like that before you're going to spend any money on a maintenance resurfacing like a seal coat or even the overlay. So we're capturing basically all the costs that we had, you know, sort of similar to what we identified in our scope. We're preparing the estimates now. We should be wrapping up our report and submitting it here in May. So I guess that's kind of where we're at on that. If there's no questions on that, or if there are questions, I'd be glad to ask as far as what we're doing and what the next steps are. But pretty much following what the scope that we laid out to y'all when we began. One other update, since this is kind of an update item, non-action item, we're also, Temple has been kind of in charge of the Mulberry Street tank replacement, and that is moving along well. They've put the tank's been installed, all the piping, yard piping and everything. We're working through a few minor issues to wrap it up. Not issues, but just we have some outstanding things we need to wrap up before that job's complete, but it's nearing completion to where hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll be able to do a punch list and wrap that thing up. That's the CDBG project at the Mulberry Water Plant. So with that, any questions or general comments?
Thanks. Hi, Derek. Rebecca Gibson here. In the key that I'm looking at the bottom, you've got, you know, the 3 color codes. One course surface treatment, mill and overlay, and then full depth reconstruction. Is this assessment based on, well, maybe you could just speak a little bit to what this assessment is based on, if it's just the physical, like the observation of the condition, or were you able to go into the kind of depth that that's based on the impact of stormwater runoff when you're considering streets that you want to, let's just say the first 2 classifications, and I'm assuming these are in an order of like severity of condition, right? So the green and the yellow are the less 2 severe categories where you're considering an overlay. Some of these streets have been overlaid so many times that they dome, and then the stormwater runoff impacts flooding in certain areas. So is there much consideration to the impact of the water as a result of these proposed treatments to the
yeah, I mean, if there's an area where something's been built up, one thing we can do, you know, this is a study to kind of gather the condition and kind of relative scoring of all the streets, so we can kind of prioritize them, like, you know, these are critical and we need to do something to these in year 1 of the program. If council chooses to fund a street, you know, maintenance program, and then here's what, you know, these, or, you know, to where we put them back at the end of that, whether it's a 7-year program or a 10-year program or whatever that program is. So we've got a relative condition assessment of those. And then we basically, from that and from the field observation, recommended different treatment options. And you can kind of see here, there's basically 3. And then we captured all the other miscellaneous costs. There are some striping and some different things, and manholes and water valves that are in the pavement. We really didn't look at, you know, like the drainage portion, except for from the fact that if there's an area of pavement that's flat, like a lot of your intersections, you know, it seems like in the past they would do maintenance and they would stop at the intersection. Well, they did this street from this side and this street from this side and that street from that side over the years, but the intersections are, you know, pretty bad. So they haven't had anything done to them. They just stopped at the edges on a lot of them. So in those areas where they might hold, where the pavement might hold water or have a poor cross slope, I set up, you know, items like level up so that we can kind of address those, because water standing on pavement is bad. So from that perspective, yes. From the perspective of raising the road up with several years or multiple projects over a period of 10 or 15 or 20 years, no. But we would address those in design and delivery of those. So I'm capturing the cost. And if we have, let's say, a couple of years and we're doing a project that involves an overlay and we have an area that is a known issue where we're trapping water or we're impeding water or we're raising the water to where it's getting into a building or something, whatever, we can address those with items like milling or things like that when we put together the scope to be performed by a contractor.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.
Derek, at this point, do you recommend we attack the red areas first or the less invasive ones? How do you propose we go from here?
Well, what we're going to do, we're, like I said, we've got all the data and we've kind of made the reclamation. We did some double field checking on things, and I presented this draft to Jay and Martin, and kind of just so I could kind of go over it and vet it with them, make sure that, we didn't maybe miss something or leave a street off or some of the treatments. So now we're estimating all of those. And once I have the estimates done, I think I need to have sort of like what we had in the scope of our agreement is I need to really sit down with staff, with Jay, and say, in the council, what are we looking at? I mean, what are y'all looking at, trying to put in 100,000 a year or 200,000 or whatever, so that we can kind of put that program together. And that's when I would kind of split these out, because I know what order they need to go in. And yes, the red ones are the worst ones because they're being rehabbed. But from a cost perspective, you're not going to be able to do all the red ones in 1 year. It would blow any kind of program budget. So we're probably going to have to, spread these out. And it's really going to be more budget driven. Some of it may be more budget driven than, which ones need to happen first, just because can't afford to do them all at one time. But that'll happen. We'll have those discussions and see, and also that discussion is going to determine, do we have a 5-year plan, a 7-year plan, a 10-year plan, or what is that going to look like? And the whole intent is, street maintenance, something, it doesn't stop when you do this. Say it's a 10-year plan. You don't stop at 10 years. You go through 10 years, and then you need to come back and start doing it, looking at it again. And the point is, you're going to be catching up to a point where your costs go down over a period of time. Your biggest lumps are going to be in this first 10 years just because it's been deferred for so long.
And then when we first discussed this, we discussed having contractors come in and do this rather than attempting to do it in-house.
Yeah.
That's still the best plan, in my opinion, but of course, the more costly, but we have neither the manpower, the equipment, or the experience to be replacing streets.
Yeah. And it may be a little bit of a combination. And that's another thing when we start talking, when we have that budget meeting and I have all the costs here, if, say we have, and I'll just give you an example here of something that we can kick around over the next couple of weeks. But let's say we have the plan and we fund it in year 1, we have a list of streets and it's 10% of these streets. If like pothole repair and some little, fixing edge raveling and stuff like that, sort of what your public works Martin does now, they do a really good job of doing that now. If there's some of those things they could do on those things, well, then you can kind of pull some of those items out and have the contractor really focus on the big stuff like full depth pavement repair on the bad stuff, and then seal coat and overlays and things like that. So that's, we can kind of, once we know what we're dealing with dollar wise and we're looking at budget stuff and how long this is going to be, we can iron that out. But yeah, I think the most of it, especially the rehab and the resurfacing, would need to be done with contractors.
Thank you. Jared?
How long do you typically expect resealing or resurfacing, the 1 layer deal? How long do you think that normally lasts?
Yeah, that is a maintenance thing, because the worst thing that, for pavements is when you get the cracks, which
Right.
just all of these streets do. It's just a way to keep the water out of the pavement. Just to give you an example, like TxDOT would probably reseal coat their roadways once every 7 years on average. So that's why I said, your typical plan is probably going to be, 7 to 10 years, somewhere in there, and it kind of depends on budget. And the ones that I recommend, the hot mix on, those are kind of more your retail or your, business areas, and also school and bus traffic and things like that have a lot of heavy vehicles, turning movement, delivery trucks, things like that for the most part. I guess like 15th Street. I'm assuming y'all, it sounds like y'all have the draft map that I put together. 15th Street, there's a lot of truck traffic in there, and then you have the RVs that come down that section right there. It gives you a more durable surface, and it adds a little bit of structure. And then, of course, the park, that road there along the park, that's another one that kind of gets quite a bit of traffic and gets, kind of tore up on the edges quite a bit. And so that's kind of our method, or what we, kind of use for when do we use an ACP or an overlay.
Sure.
Did you happen to look at the park itself, the road that goes through there?
Yes, that's not on here because when I was, the times I was down there, I didn't get access. The gates were locked, and I kept thinking, well, they're going to get unlocked soon. But I don't think any of us thought we'd be sitting here, 7 or 8 weeks later. We're still where we're at. But I did that this past week. Got with Martin and got in there and did do that one. Yes, sir. It just was not done when I did put this map together.
What did you find?
That thing's in pretty good shape. I think we're recommending it for a seal coat. It needs some pothole and pavement repair, and there's a few base failure areas. And then I know that Martin is doing one little section in there where they're going to kind of blade lay some hot mix in there in that section where it's kind of gravel, where you get the erosion from the runoff that comes down the hill. But the rest of it, pretty good shape, and recommending that one for a seal coat.
Will you work us up an estimate on that road for resurfacing?
Oh yeah, that'll be included in this. Yes, sir. Yes, it'll be. When I put this map together, I hadn't done it, so I didn't include it, but it will be included in the report with cost data for the seal coat and whatever other miscellaneous items that go with it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dan?
Derek?
For Derek. Hi, Derek. Any more comments, Derek?
Derek, Dan, I mean, they both start with D. That's pretty close.
Thank you, Derek.
Thanks,
All right.
Derek.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay,
All good.
we'll be taking a closer look at that once we have a budget meeting. Item E, presentation of recommendations for riparian management and erosion control at the Bandera City Park, Bandera, Texas. Discussion of possible action to adopt a recommendation that provide direction for implementation. Rebecca?
Okay, really excited to have this item on the agenda, and you guys will be hearing from some of our guests about this presentation as well. They were a part of our initial meeting. We did a site visit. I don't know if you had a chance to read through this, but just a little bit of background for those of you who were not on council. At least a couple of years back, there were several park committee meetings and the desire to find ways to implement the city park master plan. And one of the big decisions that came from that was, as you know, the Public Works Department put up the hitching post to block the traffic from the river side of the road. This was kind of a phase one in the effort to improve the riverbank, the riparian vegetation, and reverse the balding effect that the traffic has, how that has devastated the riverbank over continued use through the years. So just reaching out to some local resources and working with Jay, city administrator, Jay and I actually decided kind of on this order of things that we would do some background information and then bring the recommendations to council. So that's kind of how we got here today. And just to highlight this little piece of the city park master plan on stormwater, which Derek actually, funny enough, he just mentioned some of the negative impacts of the stormwater runoff are also impacting the roads through the city park. And this plan does actually address some of those causes as well. But you've got your stormwater section, and then after the city park master plan, the Medina River watershed provides ecological and hydrological services, including water storage in the riparian root zones, water quality improvement through riparian vegetation, flood attenuation and flow stabilization as the riparian areas releases water to maintain base flow or absorbs water when the river flows are high. Any future stormwater improvements need to be within Bandera City Park should be designed with very limited structural components and utilize as many low impact development strategies to assist in minimizing erosion and costly structural repairs and replacements during period flood events. So this speaks to a lot of the inspiration behind, that's from the City Park Master
Okay,
Plan,
thank you.
which I just have on
Thank
me. And it's also on the city website if you wanted to refer to that. I was just kind of tying this to the City Park Master Plan for your information, right? And what I do want to add in here is the piece about handicap accessibility, because that did come up in my conversation with Jay, and again when we were at the site visit. While there was some discussion to making those improvements, they won't be included in this plan because they need to be engineered, but we have some recommendations for other funding resources, ways to tie that into this plan as well. So with that, I will hand it over to, I believe Daniel had decided he was gonna hop on next. So Daniel, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. Can everyone hear me in the council room and on the phone?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good morning. Again, thanks for inviting me to be a part of your meeting, and thanks for all the leadership. It's incredible listening to all that y'all take on as a council. So thanks for all that y'all are doing. Again, my name is Daniel Oppenheimer. I am the Land Program Manager at the Hill Country Alliance. The Hill Country Alliance is a nonprofit organization. We work with partners throughout Central Texas to conserve the natural resources and heritage of the Hill Country. Our programs focus on land, water, night skies, and the communities. And I was asked to sort of set the stage for this morning's presentation. Do the members of the council, do y'all have a hard copy of those draft recommendations in front of you? I'm on my phone, so I can't really see all that close.
Yes.
Yes.
Daniel.
Okay, great. So what you have before you, and for the folks on the phone who may not have a copy of these are simply a list of general recommendations, best management practices that we identified for the park to address some of the stated concerns and values that the Mayor Pro Tem just mentioned. Things like mitigating floods, reducing erosion, providing high quality public access. These are general recommendations that you as a city, as a community, can tailor to your specific needs. And so there's reference to providing handicap access. These are general recommendations, and you can tailor them to your specific needs and values and priorities. And so what we're going to do in terms of the structure of this presentation is I'm going to set it up. We're going to start down by the river. Let's imagine we're all out at the park together. We're going to start out down in the river. We're going to hear from Ryan McGillicuddy at Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to talk a little bit about some of our general recommendations around the Medina River. Then we're going to walk up the hill and hear from Levi Sparks with the Bandera River Authority and Groundwater District to talk about some of the nexus with the previous conversation about water coming off the roads and down the hill and what we can do within the park. So I'm going to set things up for Ryan. Again, we're going to talk about what are referred to as riparian areas. That's a term that's relatively new for us here in Texas. Riparian areas simply refer to that transition zone. If your feet are in the Medina River and you're wet and you step out of the river onto the banks, it's that transitional area between the creek or the river or even a lake and the drier uplands. And across the entire landscape, it's a relatively small part, usually comprising about 1% to 2% of the landscape. But when these riparian areas are characterized with some deep-rooted native plants, they provide us with a tremendous number of values, which the Mayor Pro Tem highlighted earlier. Things like providing better riverbank stability, managing erosion, flood mitigation, habitat for fish and wildlife, all sorts of good things. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan McGillicuddy with Texas Parks and Wildlife to talk to you a little bit more about these riparian areas and our recommendations. Again, thanks for having us join you this morning.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel. Can you all hear and see me okay?
We can hear you, Ryan. That's it.
You can hear me. Okay. Well, Daniel, thanks for setting that up. And thank you guys for having y'all's meeting. I'll try to be as quickly as possible. I do have a toddler in the background. So if I have to jump and bail real quick, if something's changes with my situation, Daniel can take over for me. In any case, yeah, my name is Ryan McGillicuddy. I work for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. I'm a conservation biologist in the River Access and Conservation Program. And, essentially what my role is I work with landowners, private landowners, organizations, municipalities, specifically in the Hill Country to encourage the adoption of best management that help conserve and protect our stream resources. So we were asked by city representatives to come take a look and make some general recommendations for how the park can be managed to accommodate both the recreational aspect that it's so cherished for, but also incorporate some of these management strategies that will provide more of the ecological function that can benefit from managing these riparian areas in a more prescriptive way. And so, you know, my
Hey, Ryan, you're cutting in and out just a bit.
okay.
Nothing now.
Okay. Just let me know if I need to maybe slow down, and then if I'm cutting in and out, if I continue to, and we'll see what we can do. Maybe I can reset. Am I still cutting in and out a bit?
At the moment, it's better.
Okay. Maybe I'll just slow down my talking and see if that helps a little bit. So essentially, my agency has, you know, a dual mission, and that's to provide recreational opportunities to the public of Texas, but also to conserve natural resources. And so when I approach, you know, a situation like what y'all have here, I have that in mind. And there's a way to manage some of our recreational areas and our public natural resources where you can accommodate both, you know, use, enjoyment, access, but also that ecological and conservation goal. And there's a lot of opportunity, I think, given the length of river and the size of the park that you have in Bandera to be able to achieve both of those. There is a situation, you know, that where it's being what we call, you know, loved to death in certain areas where there's a little bit more trampling and overuse, but there's significant stretches of river that I think can accommodate both of these, the ecological function and the recreational use. And the way that we kind of encourage management of some of these areas is the first two recommendations in this this document that we provided y'all. They kind of go hand in hand. And what it is first, it's the establishment of what we call a grow zone in these riparian areas, and that's where simply you allow native vegetation to grow up along the river, and that vegetation provides a number of functions that Rebecca and Daniel touched on already. And then the second, you know, these grow zones can be interspersed with what are called targeted access areas. So that's areas where you notice the riverbank has generally pretty good stability, but maybe there's also that's an area where people are naturally drawn to and they want to access that area. It's a good spot to get in the river. You can continue mowing and maintaining those areas in more of a manicured fashion, but then in between those targeted access areas, you have these grow zones. And depending on the needs of the community, or how many targeted access areas you want, those grow zones can be, 20 feet long, they can be 50 feet long, interspersed as often as you need. But the idea is to have them kind of alternating. So there's some examples in the document of, one grow zone and kind of a wider one. And then you scroll down and you can see that there's one that's, a smaller targeted access area. If you notice that area that might just be used more for fishing, not for getting into the river. So you can tailor these to the needs of specific areas as you go up and down the river. There's plenty of examples of where this has been implemented to great effect, throughout the Hill Country. One that we included in the document is Blue Hole Park in Wimberley that used to be just absolutely bare. They were having problems with erosion and compaction around their cypress trees. The health of the cypress trees were in question. When that came into public hands, they implemented a plan that put these grow zones in. And they can have more of a manicured look if that's the need. And some of the areas in Wimberley do have that, but others are just a little bit more left to their own and wild. I think one of the most important things that you can do when you install a grow zone or establish a grow zone in a public use area is the signage and the messaging to the public. One of the first municipalities to implement grow zones in this fashion was the city of Austin in some of their parks, and they initially started by calling them no-mow zones. And that was well-intentioned, but the message that was received to the public by the signage no-mow zone was that they weren't doing anything. They were not maintaining the park. And they saw how that was received. They got a lot of complaints, and they simply changed the messaging to, well, these are actually grow zones. We are doing something proactive to help stabilize the riverbanks, to provide better fish and wildlife habitat and enhance the recreational opportunity for people in the park and the beauty and aesthetics and all that. And, that messaging, it was much better received. So that's really the point we're trying to get across by establishing these grow zones. It's really an enhancement opportunity. That's kind of the basic idea behind those first two elements. There's other things we included about woody material and plantings and ways to enhance and take some active restoration. But really the way that grow zones are initiated and is they're mostly just left alone and monitored for invasives. And then you can put a border around them that looks a little more natural, like you have with the hitching posts up top. You can do a similar thing by just laying some logs around the ground along the border. Again, these can be tailored to your specific needs and with the input of the community about where they want to access it. The access areas don't have to have a hardened structure to get in and out of the river, but they can if there's areas that have more intensive use. Like I noticed one area down at the bottom of 11th Street, and the downstream most portion of the park, just upstream from the dam, is an area that gets a lot of use. And that might be an area where you could consider hardscaping like you do have in some areas along Cypress Creek and Wimberley at Blue Hole, or along the San Marcos River where I live. So anyhow, we're just here to kind of, present this to y'all and answer any questions that you might have. And this is a draft document, so it can be a living, breathing, evolving thing that is changed with the input and needs of your community. So thanks again for having me. Hang on and let Levi talk and hang on for any questions.
Thanks so much, Ryan.
But did most of that come through okay? Do you have any questions for me right now?
Can you leave him on for a second?
Thank you, Ryan. I'm really
Okay.
glad to see this going to happen for the city park. I do want to make sure that we do leave things to their own, to kind of be a little wild instead of manicured, because I would like to keep our city park kind of in its natural habitat. And then also, I like the idea that we can tailor it to our needs. And so we can really, all of us are down there and mark spots that we think need to be more structured. And I think it's an overall great idea to preserve our river in the city park.
I think it's a great idea. We're gonna have a healing factor in this. Whatever we decide to plant, what we decide to do, it has to be like almost people-proof. I mean, if you've been to our park on weekends, there's dirty diapers, there's trash, there's bottles, there's coal ashes, there's things all over the park. And there are gonna be kids traipsing through this stuff, picking the flowers and heading them off to mom. I mean, I think it's a great idea, guys, but we've got to consider that our park is used every single day. I'm crazy about the idea of controlling the runoff.
Well, I think that call comes under tailoring to our needs.
And proper signage will help a lot. At least they're told, you know? Kids, it may not keep them out so much, but also the cedar post fence that they're putting around it, that'll slow people down quite a bit. I think a lot of people will respect that because they'll appreciate the use of it and the use of it.
I just wonder, Ryan, if you're still there, I don't know if you've been able to hear the considerations from council, and if you had any input on the experience that you've had where this type of adjustment to the public, and I know you've mentioned signage, but maybe other methods to help people receive, understand, and I guess maybe just get the community buy-in about the effort, and maybe some of what the mayor is speaking to has a lot to do with more of our out-of-town guests that come in to enjoy the park. But I kind of have in mind this idea that as you start to care for something more and you're demonstrating that care, people tend to naturally observe that and more follow suit than anything. So I just wondered from your experience if you had anything to share on that.
Ryan, do you mind if I jump in and talk about our example in Blanco real quick and then let you
Sure, please,
dovetail
yeah.
from there?
Yeah, please do.
So again, this is Daniel Oppenheimer. Ryan and I work really closely with some partners in the community of Blanco on a much, this was on a very small tributary to the Blanco River, much smaller park, totally different scale. But nonetheless, there were a number of folks who wanted to find similar opportunities to balance the ecological function and public access. And so we worked with a number of local stakeholders there. We came up with the targeted access areas in the grow zones. We delineated them with some nice cedar logs and some nice signage. And then, there were several press releases that were put out in the local newspaper to share with the community what it is we were doing and why. And then we actually had a community celebration in the fall where we had a ribbon cutting. The mayor was out there, members of council, and all the local volunteers who helped make it happen. And it was a community celebration. And so I think there's a lot of potential ways to engage the public and do some public education through this process on riparian areas, what they are, why they matter, and how they can help us all out.
Sure, that's a good example. And I think one other lesson from that specific project was, Daniel mentioned that there were volunteers. Those volunteers were performing an incredible function in that project, and that, they were providing much needed cost-free labor, but they were also from the groups, Keep Blanco Beautiful, the local Texas Master Naturalist chapter. And these are people that were deeply involved in their community in other means besides just volunteering for the protection of this park. They're dedicated members of their community. And so they help spread the word as well. So, engaging early on with some of those organizations that can be your advocates and your mouthpieces, making sure that, the planning is involving, all the stakeholders, and that you're listening and incorporating everybody's opinion. It ultimately there might still be some people that are still upset they can't drive right down to the river, and that's going to be one user group that you might not be able to win over. But I think, engaging early on and in creating the right messaging and tailoring that to what you're doing and demonstrating the beneficial functions that are coming through. And there's also, for the people that might be a little bit more motivated by the economics, we've seen in other areas the maintenance costs be reduced by a change in management where you're allowing more of the vegetation to do the work of stabilizing the riverbanks and being a preventative function and reduce cost in mowing in some areas. So just, continue to communicate those messages early and often, and we can continue to be a resource for y'all as well and point to other examples where this has been implemented.
I'd like to ask Brian a question.
Yes, Don.
Brian, I'm Don Clark. I'm new on the council. But some years ago, we had runoff problems and we worked on them. I'm wondering, can we put barricades up where all these feeder streets or these streets come off the hill going down, which causes a lot of erosion in the areas where they do meet the river or the park water?
So one thing that Levi is going to talk about is going to touch on some of the erosion and the force of surface flow as it affects the park. He'll talk a little bit about that, but I do think that once we start getting into some of those really more prescriptive engineering type of solutions, that that's a little bit beyond my area of expertise, and so I'm going to hesitate from making specific recommendations for where to place hard barriers to channel sheet flow and things like that. But in general, what Levi's going to talk about is implementing some strategies to spread water out and allow it to flow in kind of a sheet flow, fashion, so that it's not causing rills and gullies and, being channeled into one area that might exacerbate erosion. So I think Levi's going to talk on that a little bit. And that, unless y'all have any questions for me right now, that might be a good transition. Up to y'all though. I'm not leading this.
May I, Susie? I agree with you, Ryan. It is a great transition, and maybe you want to just hold on to this question for the end as we're wrapping up, and I do want to allow this to all move forward. But I would ask you, and again, maybe at the end, just to speak a little bit on flood mitigation through the riparian ecosystem, just a little bit more, again, towards the end, because that's a piece that I think is really relevant, particularly where it comes into funding opportunities. So, but I agree, if you want to let Levi jump in here so we can keep it moving forward.
And remember, F is about the funding. We're
Yes.
just talking about the plan right now.
I just wanted him to address
That's
flood
fine.
mitigation and riparian.
You want me to take on some of the flood stuff now or at the end and let Levi go? I didn't quite hear that.
The two will go hand in hand, I know. Thanks.
Yes.
Is Levi unmuted now?
Yes. Okay. I was just making sure that's it. So once again, thank you all for having us here. Ryan, Daniel, thank you for joining us in this venture as well. So I will be relatively brief. One thing, excuse me?
Real quick, tell everybody who you are and where.
Oh, yes. I am Levi Sparks. I am the River Authority Operations Manager at the Bandera County River Authority and Groundwater District. Rebecca approached me and Daniel about this project she had in mind, and we brought in Ryan, and it's been a wonderful venture. So one thing that they wanted me to talk about was how upland management can slow water and help infiltrate water into the water table. One of the things, and you can see on 11, the site-specific discussions, most of these site-specific discussions that we were going was erosion problems, and most of those erosion problems actually came from water coming down like 11th Street, coming down from highway, I believe that's 46 or 16, and then the gullies. So the upland management, this kind of goes in with those sort of grow zones that we were discussing earlier. And I do believe it's important to note that a grow zone doesn't necessarily have to be completely let wild. It can still be manicured to an extent, but for every inch of grass that you add, to an existing grass patch, that can significantly slow water down. The existing erosion problems that we have discussed, and Rebecca was at another demonstration of this, using one rock structures, just simple rocks that can help slow down that water to where the water doesn't hit this bare dirt from the well-used portions of the park quite as fast, which is causing the gullies, which is causing the erosion. And talking with Jay, this could be as simple as don't mow it quite as low. It can go from any extent that you would want. So the importance of the slowing and the infiltrating of water goes into the fact that reducing the erosion will also reduce the existing bacteria load at the city park in most instances. As you know, it being around here, we have put out the bacteria levels in Bandera City Park is normally on the higher end, not necessarily dangerous, but on the higher end on bacteria numbers. It is also important to note, before I move on, that the general manager of the River Authority and Groundwater District, Dave, is here. He is just muted. He is under Haley's name right there, but he is available if anybody has questions for him specifically. But the importance of the slowing of water, what Ryan and Daniel have talked about, well, Ryan specifically, the grow zones talking at the river itself, that's your your last attempt to slow the water. You really want to slow the water before it even gets down too close to the river. Because even if you have an excessive grow zone, if the water is not slowed before it gets there, you're going to have those gullies that start to form just from the amount of force coming in water, especially considering 11th Street Bridge, it is shooting, or 11th Street, it is coming down that hill extremely fast. So the importance of that will help, the importance of upland management will help reduce that. Ryan talking about sheet flow, all that is taking that section of water that is barreling towards the park and just spreading it, making it shallow, move slower. And that's where the grow zones come apart. And it is important to note that these recommendations, they are 100% tailored, can be tailored in one way or another. And it can go as an extensive, or it can be as inintensive as you can really envision. It's, as I stated earlier, it could be as simple as letting it grow to 4 inches of height. The amount of water that would be slowed just from letting it go to its existing 1.5 inch grass height to 4 inches, which still could be a relatively manicured, and I would still recommend the heavier grow zones in targeted areas, but you could also do some strategic plantings. The issue is on the upper end of the park, you have these large grass fields, which we definitely want to keep for recreation, for kids to play in and things like that. But above that, closer to the fence, that's part that is not being used, letting that go to a much more significant growing area to slow that water before it even really gets to the point that it starts becoming a problem. So is there any more questions for me? Do y'all have anything else for me? I just wanted to be real quick and brief.
And
So Levi alluded to some techniques that Jill and I learned when we went to the Hillside Stewardship workshop a couple months back. Some of these are where you had mentioned barricades before. These are just structured a little bit differently. And when he said allowing the water to sheet, so like spreading it out. And one of the things we learned is kind of a catchphrase, where water is running, you want to make it walk. Where water is walking, you want to make it sit. And because slowing and sinking the water is one of the main goals, because that's where you get into the aquifer recharge piece. And that's also what's going to help eliminate that cutting and that, like he said, gullying of the water. So yeah, I know that that was a lot, and I appreciate everybody, all of our guests and sharing. Daniel and Brian and Levi, you guys are fantastic, and I guess
Motion time.
if I may, I would like to make a motion to adopt the recommendations for riparian management and erosion control at the Bandera City Park.
And Jerry. Further discussion? Lynn?
I think it's a great idea. Thank you, Rebecca, so much for looking into all of
Great
this.
job.
And so you did a fantastic job. I do know, though, that some of our citizens will probably not be happy that the park is not going to stay in its total natural habitat. But I think that our goal as a council is that we're going to try to make it tailored to our needs and tailored to the citizens' needs, and that, and after time, people will get used to some of the restrictions that they're going to feel. I think overall, it's going to be the best idea to preserve our city park for generations to enjoy.
A discussion that Rebecca and I have had several times is that I live today and she lives 40 years in the future. And she's looking out for the future.
Yes, that's what we're doing. Yes.
Any further discussion? All in favor? All in favor, Madam
Thank you, council.
Okay, let's move on to item F. Discussion, deliberation, and possible action to authorize the city to apply for a Texas Water Development Board Flood Infrastructure Fund loan and/or grant for city park riparian management and erosion control plan in partnership with the BC, or rather that's Bandera County River Authority and Groundwater District. It's easier to say that than to say BCRGAD.
So to me, these go hand in hand. Obviously, we were able to get this recommendation passed. Thank you so much, council. And now I'd like to help go out and find the money to fund the project. With council's permission, what I'm proposing is that we authorize the city administrator to partner with the River Authority Groundwater District, which they are, I'm not volunteering them, by the way, they're willing participants and anxious to help. So I don't know, Haley, if you could unmute Dave, he's under Haley, Levi said. And I don't know, Jay and Dave, if y'all want to kind of take the lead on this.
So they can see me.
I will offer just one other thing real quick, actually, before I'll turn over the floor. I provided you all with a document that was the result of or actually two documents, I apologize, sort of there at the back of the recommendation draft, the last just 3 pages, or sorry, 4 pages. These documents are the result of a meeting that Catherine Romans with the Hill Country Alliance had organized for Jay and I to attend, and she had resources from several agencies, including I'll email those to y'all. I'm sorry, I don't have all of their agencies in front of me, but they did a lot of customized and tailored data research to help the city potentially move forward with a project like this. And there was also some discussion on the wastewater side, but I know that's not the agenda item. And I do want to make very clear that this is not to in any way going to interfere with or interrupt any other funding opportunities that we have for other projects. This is in and of itself to enhance the park, but not to take away from any other projects that we have going on. I know that you guys received some federal infrastructure or fund information from Texas, not federal, but from the Texas Water Development Board. Just some background information there on the types of grant categories. But what I really want to draw your attention to is on this Bandera estimated financing opportunities under FIP. I was able to find on the census map that Bandera, the city of Bandera and all of the city is under the census tract 1.01 block group 2. So where you see where it gets the yellow words, and I don't know if anyone's colorblind here, so sorry if you are, but the yellow words and then the second line there. What these percentages are is the estimation of the grant portion of the project. So if it's a category 1 project, you can see the estimated grant portion is 90%. So category 2, 55%, category 3, 85%, and category 4, 85%. This information is likely going to be helpful for some of our other projects as well, but this was just done for us to give us an idea of how much of this we're looking at potentially as 100% or as grant dollars as opposed to loan dollars through this program.
Rebecca, I have a question. Looking at your, some of this is for Bandera City, some of it's for Bandera County. Is there a difference?
Yes, well, this was done by a person who was giving more of a broader projection. That's why I pointed our attention to this specific line right here. We are trapped 1.01 block group 2.
Okay.
And that's the whole city limits right there.
Thank you. I missed that part.
Okay. So, Jay, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I think this, I wish we had this for everything that we get whenever we're looking for money to go out, because this helps and speeds things up a lot. It tells us basically what opportunity we have to get money. So we don't have to spend weeks or months back and forth. Are we eligible for this, or can we get this? We want to do this, but we don't know if we can get enough money to do this. This is a big help. Moving forward, it's given us basically the floor plan on which way to go money-wise. I think it's a great program. I think we should utilize this the best that we can. And I'm not saying we need to go down and put a water park in the park, but I do think we need to look at this and move forward if possible, if council should agree on this.
Can I just make one quick comment before we get Dave to chime in on the River Authority side? What Jay just said, the way he complimented this work, this was done by several individuals. It was all put together through the Hill Country Alliance, that they customized this data for us, and it's a huge leg up in the process. And Jay's words were very complimentary to that effect, and it's absolutely true. I was floored when I saw the work that had been done on our behalf. And these organizations are absolutely thrilled to help us and assist us even further as we continue down this path. They've offered some other experts in the grant writing department, and it's just really an honor to be so highly considered among these organizations as such a worthy location and entity to get this kind of assistance.
So they gave us all of this assistance at no cost. That's awesome. Thank you so much. At no cost to the city.
Dave, are you with us?
Yeah, I've got a few things to add. You know, we've gone through two application processes with Water Development Board in this flood grants, and both times we were successful. So we would very much like to be a help and a resource to the city. We completely agree with any time that we're going to work on, you know, flood infrastructure, and especially when we're dealing with protecting the riparian zones of the river. I commend the council for getting out in front of this and moving forward on it. So what we need to do is we need to develop exactly what we're looking for, how much it's going to cost, develop a plan of how we're going to put the grant out there, and start looking at what exactly you all want to ask them for. And when we do this, I would think it'd also be a good idea to go ahead and look towards getting that USGS high intensity rainfall gauge that I talked to the council about before, about getting to help augment our flood warning system for the city. The city gauge, which was a long-term gauge, is no longer operational because it had to be moved. So we need to look for another spot. I've talked to USGS about it, and I believe they're going to be able to get some cooperative money to help us with it. So I think we could wrap that up in there because it's important for the city to have a rainfall gauge, especially one that's a high intensity, let you know how fast the rain is coming, not just how much. So any way we can help, we've got people here that can help with the grant writing process. We've got some in-kind services that we can put into the grant where we have, our scientists here can help with it. But we need to really nail down exactly what we want to ask Water Development Board for. And any way we can help, just let us know. We will help.
Thank you, Dave. My question is this: are we partnering? Should we partner with the River Authority? Are y'all going to help with some of the financial obligation? Because I believe that before we get too far down the road, we need to get an interlocal agreement between the two agencies if we're going to work together.
Yeah, we could do that, but before we even go that path, we need to find out what we want to do, because right now I have no idea how much this is even going to cost. So yes, you're right about the intergovernmental agreement or a memorandum of understanding, but we need to knock out exactly what you all want so that we can figure out the cost and how we would move forward. We also are going to have timetables on this grant process. I'm not familiar right now when it closes, but they don't keep them open long. And there also is a time limit on how quick the project can be done.
Dave, I will jump in just right here. One of the reasons that I wanted to put the partnership with BCRAGD on the agenda item is so that we could form this relationship, and then in the event that we may potentially in the future want to go to that board to request some of the matching funds, should that be necessary, as we discovered through the grant writing process, that we were partnered adequately in documentation that we could potentially be able to do that. Dave and his team, we do all pay. They're a taxing entity, right? So they're providing a service to the city, and we've had a really great ongoing relationship. So that's why, that's one of the reasons why they've been such a natural partner from the beginning of the process. But in terms of what you're saying, if you feel like we need to check with the attorney, do the interlocal thing, visit with their board first, I'm happy to follow whatever process is right and appropriate.
Also, too, when you get these grants, somebody has to project manage it. I can tell you from our flood warning system, which was much more complex, it literally can be almost a full-time job. There's reports that are going to have to be, there's audits that can be performed. They don't just give the money on these flood projects and walk away. There's actually it can be pretty labor intensive, and we can figure out how we're going to handle that. But it would also be how big of a project are you looking at? So like I said, we got to kind of figure out what you all want to do, how big it's going to be, how much money we're looking at before we can clearly understand what needs to happen.
So I will say too that the gentlemen that were in the presentation call are ready to move forward with the next plan or next steps under the recommendations, and if that ties hand in hand with the grant, what I would like to see happen is to authorize the city administrator to move forward. And then I know that we do have a contact on a potential grant writer and the grant writer is the project manager, if I'm not mistaken. In general.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So yeah, and like Dave mentioned, this new funding opportunity has been recently opened. COVID hit, and I know a lot is still to be determined from the Texas Water Development Board, but time is of the essence, and it's time to jump on this pool of funding for this and possibly any other project.
There's a timeline in here that I believe. I saw it.
This is Daniel. I believe it's in June. There's a short 2-page application due at some point in the month of June. for yes, getting going in that the flood infrastructure fund process.
Jay, any at this point, do you see that this is the appropriate step, is just to authorize beginning the process?
I believe so.
That's what I understood as well.
And then we need to check with attorneys and with River Authorities Board if they want to go into an interlocal or some type of agreement. That don't necessarily have to be an interlocal agreement, but some type of agreement to where we're both doing everything the right way. And then set aside or set the number of funds that we want to look at, and then move forward that way. And like you say, the grant administrator would be the project manager.
Again, we're talking about funding, so let's get moving because we've got a lot of things to decide before the end of this year.
May I make a motion?
Yes, you may.
I'd like to make a motion to authorize the city administrator to move forward in the application process for the Texas Water Development Board Flood Infrastructure Fund Loan and/or grant for city park riparian management and erosion control plan.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor? All in favor, not opposed. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Levi and Daniel and Ryan, I'll be in touch soon.
I'm so excited.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Item G, discussion of possible action to accept applications for the vacant city council seat. Council, discussion, motion, something.
If we can discuss, we have had a lot of special meetings lately, and I'm sure you guys know that in a lot of our situations, like if we didn't have 4 council members here today, we wouldn't be able to have the meeting at all. So leaving a vacant seat puts us in the same predicament. Should we need a supermajority? Should we need a special meeting? It just really restricts anything from happening. If council can't overrule planning and zoning, or there's so many different things that have to happen with a supermajority. And I know that we're getting down. We don't have that many months left before November and election time, but I would like to see the seat filled, as we've done recently. So I will make a motion, if I may, to accept applications to fill a vacancy and revisit the filling the vacancy at our
May 21st.
May 21st meeting.
I'll second.
Then second.
But if I may say something, I really, because of the time limit left, didn't think we needed to fill this position. But in light of what has happened with one of our council members, resigning, if we had not appointed Dawn, then there would have been a need for a special election. And so in light of looking at it that way, I would agree with that. We take applications.
Thank you.
So that'll give us 2 weeks to take applications for the next meeting.
Is that enough time?
Yeah, I just agree. I'm sorry. I agree with Lynn's.
Calendar. If the deadline.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have to put a deadline on it? Could we not review any application that comes in right up to the point before our meeting? I mean, if we're deciding on the 21st at that
That's
meeting.
only 2 weeks out.
Yeah,
That's what I was
let's just
looking at.
leave it at that. Unless you
I
have.
would say at least the day before. So
Well, let's have, yes, let's set a deadline close to our meeting, because there has to be time to review these things. If anybody wants to ask questions, although we know, most of the potential applicants, I believe, but let's please set a deadline. We don't need something coming in at 5:45 in the afternoon.
Would you like the motion amended to include a deadline?
Would you please,
Wouldn't
to be accepted by,
What do you guys? I'm happy to.
A few days before. a couple
I would
days
say
at
by
least.
Monday, the 18th.
It gives you a little bit of time to at least think about, your decisions.
How about, that's a week from, that's 10 days out. Monday, the 18th.
Okay.
at 5 p.m.
I will amend my motion to include a deadline for applications to be received at City Hall by Monday, May 18th at 5 p.m.
Okay, Lynn, you still good? All right. Thank you, Rebecca. That eases some of the confusion. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? All in favor, none opposed. All right, council. Item H, discussion of possible action to establish date for reopening City Park. We have had so much foot traffic in the park, we might as well be open. Now, of course, there's the health issues, there's all this, but we're still having to pay our city employees to go clean up the park. They're still having to mow the park. They're still having to maintain the park. Have we had Jay and Will? I'd like y'all to comment on the park situation.
Well, I think with it being closed as it is, it's causing more of a problem than a benefit for us. One, we're absolutely getting no revenue. Two, it's a lot more work cleaning it up because we don't have someone doing that all the time on the weekends, for example. Boys and Girls Club are seeing problems from people parking in their parking lot. Of course, trash. Trash is going to be trash regardless of what's open and what's closed. You know, people are lazy in some cases. My recommendation is we open it, take the tape around the tables up, and let the people be people. You know, we can't train them. We can't go out there and beat them with a stick, although some of them we'd like to sometimes. But I think we will stop a lot of problems. They're breaking into the bathrooms. Again, they're crapping in front of the bathroom doors or on the doors.
Good enough.
Yeah.
Stop right.
So I'd like to hear from Will, please.
I echo everything that our city administrator said. We've discussed it a couple of times. We started off with I think with the right idea with the foot traffic only, but the word is quickly spread that the Bandera City Park is open and you can step over the fence. And as always, when this goes on, they are less likely to clean up after themselves when they have to tote all their stuff down to the water from the street. They leave things that they normally wouldn't leave. They're leaving all kinds of trash in the Boys and Girls Club parking lot. You know, all the other problems he's already suggested. I'm gonna have to have 3 officers working this weekend just to deal with the Mother's Day to keep people out of there. Frankly, I wish we could just hurry up and get it open this weekend. I don't think there's a way, but you know, the sooner we can start getting them in, letting them in there, it'll alleviate a lot of these problems, and they'll be throwing the trash away better and less parking problems, less tearing stuff up.
Any other discussion?
I would have a question, if that's okay.
I want to say before
I don't mind waiting for the motion if that's.
Jerry, did you want to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to immediately open the park, City Park, beginning Monday.
Not to include this week.
Oh,
Mother's
well,
Day
sure.
weekend. Oh,
Yeah,
oh, to include this Mother's Day weekend.
You want to open it Friday?
sure. Today.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, let's make it clear.
Whatever makes logistical sense as far as.
Well, I need it, okay, I want to open it tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Blah. Is that your motion? Would you make a motion to that effect?
I would like to make a motion to open the City Park beginning tomorrow at 8 a.m., which is Friday.
I'll second this motion.
Tom's gonna second. Now, discussion. Jill,
Okay, so part of the Mother's Day weekend, I agree 100%, is we do not have employees yet to work the park. We do have people waiting until the park was open, but we called everybody and made a public announcement that the park was closed Mother's Day weekend. Now, I can get a crew of people together to get down there, but they haven't been trained. Nobody's worked at the park yet. So we're gonna have amateurs, I guess you could say, at the gate accepting money, or we have to not charge, and then it's gonna be a big mess. So that's something to consider. If we open the gates, are we gonna charge the people to come in? Because this is one of the biggest weekends for the city park.
Jerry,
What's the repercussions of having the new people there? What's the worst case scenario?
Mass confusion is
Well, we'll
one
probably have
part.
that anyway. Go ahead.
Yes, Jay.
And this is just a food for thought, but we open it up tomorrow, Saturday, whatever day. We can maybe get some kids in there that can just monitor the park, picking up trash, keeping it clean, but not charging at the gate, for example. Mother's Day is usually a very, very big weekend of traffic going through. So I don't know that these kids would be really ready for the surge, I guess is what you could call it.
Rebecca.
Do you have any staff that could supplement that and work the gate that are more experienced and have? Keely's looking at me like, oh no.
None of the city staff have ever worked the gate down there because then you run into an overtime issue. We do have a few of the kids that worked last year, young adults, that are coming back this year. So, I mean, we probably can get it covered. It may be a nightmare and it could be crazy. I think it will help that Will is gonna have some extra police down there to control the people lined up outside the gate and things like that. But you know, you're talking about today's Thursday and getting people to ready by Saturday. So, and changing everything we did. Although I do think it's gonna be better for the city, we can collect some money and it's gonna be easier on the municipal department. But it is kind of a last minute thing, so.
Sure.
If you run into any problems getting staffing, I'll volunteer.
Okay.
So kind.
Uh,
So kind.
No, like to see it open.
I guess I'm just wondering with the way the agenda item or the motion is worded, can we just leave all that to administrative authority? And all we're saying is we're gonna open the park and just let the administration
Well, they'll
make all,
that's the
determine
motion.
all these details.
Figure it out.
Okay, yeah.
Let them figure it out.
Mayor,
And yes, Don.
why not offer some of our city employees an opportunity that they want to pay extra money? And we've got a lot of personnel.
Well, that's true, but it's an overtime issue. I can't
Maybe
create
they'll take
another,
off Friday or Monday.
I can't, that could be something discussed, but we're talking about tomorrow, basically.
Yeah,
That would be the,
tomorrow's the
Yeah,
end of
you're right.
the pay period. So, I mean, there's a lot of other factors than just open the park and hire people and get people down there, you know, so.
I think that this holiday could justify the overtime. If you can find people to do it, if you need to pay that overtime.
Let's just it's all
You have my
administration.
blessing on that.
That's a good point.
well, and not to, but to argue the point of, we have been throwing this out for 2 weeks now. The park will be closed. I don't know how many calls have come in. I'm sure 90% of them from people out of town, but we have basically said, no, you're not going to be able to get into the park period this week. So I don't know how big of an inflow we would have from out of town people that, you know, have already heard that we are closing and told their neighbors, so forth.
Which one of you guys think?
Well, it's true, but
And I think another factor to consider, council, is that, I mean, just another, what if? So you got car number 14 back here. We just found out they've got to pay to get in. Well, they don't want to pay to get in, so they're going to leave. Well, there's 13 more cars behind them. Now they got to turn around. Now they got to get out of line. I think charging this weekend would be just a huge, huge, just mess.
I think we need to
John.
figure it out.
What has been our regular income or the amount that we take in on a big day like a Saturday?
the highest numbers I remember, like on a holiday weekend, I think was around 8,000, 8 to 10,000. I mean, I can find out, but I don't remember right off the top of my head.
I agree
But-
with Jerry, then we can pay the overtime.
But again, that was a scheduled weekend. This is not a scheduled weekend. I think there will be a lot of people still show up just out of, we're going to drive there anyway. But I do think it will not be as big as it normally is simply because of the notices we put out.
Rebecca?
Oh, go ahead. Okay. I just wondered if we could move forward with the general consensus that the council would like to see the revenue from this weekend if it's administratively feasible to make that happen.
And I agree with what Becca's saying. Let's go ahead and move on.
I agree, and I
Move
would like
forward.
I would like to see us collecting some revenue though,
Yeah,
but I'll leave it up to them.
let's let them figure that out,
Yep.
how they're gonna make it work, and we'll go on from there. So the motion is to open the park tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.
Correct.
And we have a second from Don. Any further discussion? All in favor? All in favor, none opposed. Good luck and God bless you. Okay.
I'll be out of here.
Item 5 is requested announcements. As requested by council to place items on future agenda. Guys, we need to have a special meeting Monday or Tuesday to select the engineer and the grant administrator for the GLO project. So give me a time, please.
So I can tell you that I'm probably not going to be able to make very many more morning meetings. I mean, I can make some, but not the way that we have been having them because I am working still.
Well, I really don't believe we're gonna need that many more meetings, guys. I think we've got everything straightened out. I think, we're through with these emergency meetings and special meetings. We can have it in the evening. We can have any time you want to have it, council.
It's just that one agenda item, so to be quick, you
Oh,
can have it
okay.
earlier also.
And I may not even
You
have
have
to
it
be
at 8
there.
o'clock in the morning.
I may not have to be there. There would be enough.
No, you have to be here.
Oh, I would have to be there.
Yes, a special meeting, we can't have any.
That would be good for you, man.
Well, 8 o'clock.
Monday or Tuesday.
I'm warning, but no, that's okay.
I do
think
8.
9 o'clock would be,
Monday or Tuesday.
Tuesday if it's that early.
Tuesday at 9.
If that's-
You're
I'd be
retired,
open.
you don't count.
I
It's Tuesday.
That
I've
just
got
works
to
better
see
for
it.
me,
because then I
I'll
can
be
go to work.
sometime next week.
Can you be here Tuesday at 9?
I can sure you. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Tuesday at 9? Okay.
Just
that's
One
May
quick agenda
19th.
item. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a reason we can't just have a Zoom meeting?
We
Can we
can have
post
a
it
Zoom
like that?
meeting if everybody Zooms, but we can't have a half and half is what I've been told. So if 2 people want to be here and 3 don't, it has to be all or
Okay.
none.
Jerry.
I have difficulties with these Zoom meetings because I can't hear them very well. I don't know if anything's changed.
Just asking.
I would like to have those, but I don't think I can participate.
When is, stop. A meeting at Tuesday at 9? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. When are the microphones coming?
Well, there's 2 things. So I ordered a camera and a microphone for the Zoom meetings, but because everybody in America is ordering them right now, mine has been in California for like 2 weeks, and it probably won't be here until after this is all over. That's one. The second thing, I'll turn over to Will on the microphones and.
I was focused on microphone setup and speakers so everyone in the council chamber could hear the council. And I'm waiting on one part. We could do it now, but it would involve some cord running across. It would be one cord running across the table and one cord running to the podium.
But it is coming.
I have that where we could do that now. We would just be dealing with a cord running across the table and a cord running over to the podium.
The microphones we're referring to are for the council table so that others can hear and will help Jerry and me here too.
Yes, and also have a speaker that sits back here when we have a large crowd. It would sit back here on this back thing. One wire runs back here and it plugs into it, so people back here, everybody in here could hear everything that's said.
I'm all for trying that.
Any other future agenda items, folks?
Not at this time.
Announcements, happy Mother's Day, everybody. Happy birthday, Jill. Saturday is Jill's birthday.
Oh,
I won't be at the park working.
you will be what?
I will not be at the park working, okay?
Anything else, council? Do you have a motion to adjourn? You. Rebecca makes a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Dan second. Any discussion, all in favor? All
Thank
in
you,
favor,
council.
no opposed. Thank you.
Awesome.
Gosh, we got so much done today. Yeah, yay, excited.